About 6 years ago, I created a short little video on running mechanics that basically has gone viral. We're looking at nearly 1 million downloads have occurred since we posted this video. And interestingly enough, I never really had any intentions of um, causing it to be that heavy of an education. However, I've also written about 4 books on the topic of running mechanics and also dealing with competitions like high rocks or marathon training. And some of it is very novel concepts and is maybe a little difficult for some people to absorb. So I created this video today in order to draw some clarity to the things that are important where running mechanics are concerned. And I've also brought to light some of the information that I've provided that is also a little bit more confusing for people. And I wanted to clear that up right now. And so if you'll indulge me in the next few minutes here, I'm going to share with you basically 2 parts. You're going to see how you should approach your running mechanics, why, and I'm also going to break down the icons that are associated with the things I've written that outline how you're approaching your training, how you identify aerobic versus anaerobic versus cadence versus skills. You're going to see this in a minute, so please indulge me. I think you're going to enjoy this. Okay, so here we are. I'm not using live models. I'm actually using some graphics to kind of depict various components of your running mechanics. And I'm also using it to depict the iconology I use in most of the things I've written. And I think you'll see how I arrive at the conclusions I have. And I think it's going to be awesome if you give this a shot. It's going to really pay dividends in your training. Here we go. This is ground contact. This is obviously a female that's overstriding, and you could see she's making contact on her heel first. And essentially what she's doing is she's putting on the brakes. She's stopping her forward progress momentarily, and then she's going to draw her body to where her foot is. So that's obviously going to be pulling on the posterior chain. Everything along the back side of her leg is being engaged. And you can see also from the picture, if you follow the dots, from her knee to her heel is extended beyond her knee to her hip, which basically is her putting on the brakes. Now this picture is indicating more of a correct approach. So you can see now her foot, her forefoot to be specific, is going to land beneath her knee. As she approaches her foot, within milliseconds, she'll be right over top of her foot. And what will end up happening as a result is she's going to become very stable. And that stability is going to offer an opportunity to create good force production off of the ground. Now we're looking at the heel striker once again. And what I'm trying to share with you here is the yellow line is depicting center of mass. And then from her hip to her knee to her heel, you could see, again, the red line is depicting an overstriding heel striking component. And then the dotted green line is identifying where she should be making contact. And you can see that there's a difference between the distance from her center of her mass to where it would be if she was landing on the green dotted line, which again is going to draw her closer to her center of mass and going to offer an opportunity to be very stable. So now in this picture, again, I'm drawing a green line to show center of mass, and I'm showing someone that has a tendency to rock the shoulders to and fro and not really have an effective arm swing. So that rotation in the shoulders is going to return counter rotation at the hips, which is going to return counter rotation and ground contact, which is going to lead you to step over in front of your other foot. And so this results in lateral instability. So now focus again on stability. If we're making good ground contact, we're going to have good fore and aft stability. And then if we don't cross our body like this, we're going to encourage more lateral stability. So in 360 degrees, when we make contact with the earth, we're in a very stable position to create good force off of the ground. Okay, now in this image, once again, I'm showing you and reiterating the fact that by landing on the forefoot and your contact point is going to be below your center of mass, and that's going to provide you that ultimate outcome, which is to be very stable, producing good force off the ground. Now, what I'm depicting here is the hip angle. So when you get good purchase off the ground, what's going to end up happening is it's going to give you a real good swing in your trailing leg, and that trailing sweep with your leg is going to load the anterior chain, and that eccentric energy you've created is going to result in good flexion. Your knee's going to come back up and forward and prepare you for another landing. And it's just like jumping up and down on a trampoline. The more force you put into the trampoline, the higher you hop. With same circumstance here, the more stretch you create in that trailing leg, the more flexion you get. The more flexion you get, the higher the knee carry. The knee carry is going to give you more gravitational force into the ground, which is going to give you more force from gravity, which is going to propel you even further. It's basically free energy. Okay, so what we're looking at here is basically a chart depicting 3 different approaches to your landing. And obviously the top one is indicating that you're heel striking and your toes are kind of dorsiflex pointing north. Leg is extended beyond the knee, and this is a braking action. This is not what we want to do. And then what happens with a lot of people that are transitioning from heel striking to forefoot running, they tend to go in a little too sharply, is what's being indicated here. I call it toe diving. And so this also imposes a braking force. So you may still be overstriding, you may not be landing on your heel anymore, but you're still imposing a braking force that needs to be overcome. And obviously the bottom one is showing you where your contact point is on your forefoot and your lower limb is almost on a vertical plane from the knee. So once you get onto that foot like this, your body is going to be pretty much stationed right over top of that foot. You're going to be very, very stable at that point in time. Okay, so the next bit of business is going to be revolving around the icons I've created to basically draw out training program. Now, this is kind of a novel approach to visiting training programming, where I've created an icon that represents various elements of your training. And so I'm going to share those with you now, explain to you what they are, and then show you how they would be put to work. Now, the first icon is cadence. So I think that the first thing you should be concerning yourself with is timing, how you make contact with the ground and how frequently you make contact with the ground. So this icon depicts a metronome. That's what that little dude is right there, with the gears, meaning it's a mechanical effort. So this is something that's building on your skill set. This next icon represents what I refer to as motor skill development drills. So now all the elements are in play. We're concerned about where our ground contact is. We're concerned about the timing in which we make contact with the ground. And we're also looking at what the cost of work is going to be. Now, this is information you collect after the fact when we're speaking of heart rate. So for the most part, what we're trying to do is to achieve peak velocity minus error. So this is kind of an interval-based approach. You're going to work your way up to speed, and then when you start to notice that the wheels are falling off the bus, you back off, slap yourself a few times, collect yourself, and start thinking about what you need to do to correct the problem, and then approach it again, and then approach it again. And so we're hoping that with time and corrections, you're going to start seeing greater and greater peaks in your total velocity or peak velocity. And so that will eventually parlay into sustainable paces that will be much greater than you were capable of producing before, because now you've eliminated the errors in your running mechanics. Now what we're doing is we're representing the energy systems, okay? So this icon suggests that when you see this, you're going to be training aerobically. And we're going to talk about what that means in a minute, but for now, just appreciate this icon represents training aerobically. And obviously, this icon is the polar opposite of being aerobic. It's anaerobic. And for those of you that have never heard this before, being aerobic suggests in the presence of oxygen. Anaerobic suggests in the absence of oxygen. So there's going to come a point where the intensity starts to broach your anaerobic metabolism, which is going to be leaning heavier into your carbohydrate, and that carbohydrate that's being burned is producing lactate. So the more anaerobic you become, the more lactate you produce. The more lactate you produce, the greater potential there is for breaking down your capacity to continue. So you get this lactic acidosis, for lack of a better term, meaning that your legs are starting to burn and you're just not able to continue. Now what's left is VO2 max paced running. Now, not to be confused with maximum heart rate. Your maximum heart rate is a completely different component of this process. VO2 max suggests that you've achieved the maximum amount of oxygen your body can process at a given time, and whatever intensity that that's related to is what we're speaking of. So I could tell you that this probably represents about 90 to 95% of your maximum heart rate. But to continue beyond that, and you could probably produce more and more heart rate in most cases um, above your VO2 max. However, there's not much value in pushing yourself beyond this point. So again, about 90, 95% of your maximum heart rate is kind of what we're speaking of. It's going to be brief, but it's going to pay big dividends in the global training program. Now, all that's left is time trialing. Time trialing provides you with a very easy method in determining your progress. And so you can conduct a time trial in a variety of different approaches. You can measure your aerobic potential. So, for example, let's say your aerobic zone or your aerobic training heart rate is, say, for example, 145 beats per minute. You may challenge the 145 beats per minute for, say, a 5K, and without changing heart rate, steady state at that particular heart rate, what's the outcome? How long did it take you to cover 5 kilometers? Now, this is important because as you're training, you want to see whether you're improving your aerobic potential or not. And if you're doing the right things, you should start noticing relative to the same heart rate, your pace is improving. This could be a race pace time trial. You could be just going in a race pace and seeing what the cost of work looks like and what time you're able to achieve. And obviously, for comparative analysis down the road, this is a very handy little bit of information. And obviously enough, you could do this at a variety of different distances. You can do it over the course of a mile, 5K, 10K, even upwards of 20 to 25 miles if you wanted to, depending on the type of event you're preparing for. Okay, so here we are. This little schematic is basically outlining how you would arrive at what would be construed as aerobic versus anaerobic metabolism. And then it also outlines the consequences of each. So as you can see here, this is age predicted. So if you were to take 180 and subtract your age, that's going to arrive at a very conservative aerobic heart rate. If you add 10 beats to that, in many cases, that would cause you to become anaerobic. Now, realize that everyone is different, everyone is unique. And for some people, this may be too conservative, and for others, maybe not so much. However, once you have something to bear off of, and even if you're a little bit too conservative or otherwise, these are good numbers to use in place of having a clinical evaluation, having a VO2 max test done. So what we're indicating here is 180 minus a 30-year-old's age, 150 beats per minute, add 10, now we're starting to go anaerobic. And you can see here where I've had this line drawn between aerobic and anaerobic. So let's just call that the threshold. Hate the term, but let's use it anyway. So as you go lower into the aerobic energy, you see the color gets more green, it's darker. And when you go the other way from yellow to deeper orange, I'm indicating a greater intensity or a greater amount of anaerobic energy. And so when you're at a lower intensity, the predominant energy is coming from fat, and at a higher heart rate into the anaerobic metabolism, we're drawn from carbohydrate. The deeper into the anaerobic metabolism you are, the greater percentage of carbohydrate you're using, and in so doing, this carbohydrate produces lactate. So more carbs burned, more lactate produced. And the other end of it is that you can see here I've indicated that at the lesser heart rate, of course, less calories expended, and the same thing if you spend more calories, um, or excuse me, if you run more heart rate, you're going to expend more calories. Now, to the far right, for those that are trying to figure out what this means, lactate, I'm showing the lactate percentages is going up, and it says energy rebate. Now, energy rebate suggests that if you're training predominantly in long workouts and you're kind of in between aerobic and anaerobic, say in this case 155, 160 beats per minute, whatever carbohydrate you're metabolizing, a good bit of it is going to end up back into your bloodstream, into parts of the body that are quiet, eventually back into your liver and converted to glucose, and then from there back into the working muscles as glycogen. There's the rebate. So for example, if you spent 1,000 calories, maybe, just maybe, you can get back as much as 300 calories that you had already spent from that energy exhausted. Now, that's why I refer to it as an energy rebate. And you can see also on the bottom there, there's a little legend that indicates that for women, that the numbers are a little off. So anaerobic for a woman is closer to like 15 beats up or so. Now, let's not get too worried about that. Just understand that there's a difference between being aerobic and anaerobic, and the green is indicating that it's aerobic and the orange is indicating anaerobic. Okay, now here's where it gets interesting. I've indicated to you what these icons represent earlier on. Now, what I've done here is I've created a scheme. Let's call it a workout. And this infinity symbol, it doesn't really mean much. All I'm indicating that it has the potential to be great or lesser, never ending. It's pretty much whatever you want from it. So the workout is planned across this infinity symbol, but it really, don't make too much of it. Simple as that. So you can see here where I talk about starting. At the start, the first thing we're going to infuse in this workout is cadence. We're going to work on making sure that our engine is on timing. We're going to make sure that we're hitting that 180 steps per minute. We're landing well. We're on our forefoot opposed to our overstriding heel striking or even toe diving heel striking. We're going to start making sure that we're landing correctly. And so we're going to dedicate about 5 minutes, not a long time, just 5 minutes to make sure at the correct frequency. Once that's established, we're going to move into motor skill drills. The motor skill drills are where we start to test our ability to produce more speed minus error. So when I refer to it as motor skills, because the focus here is the way you move and how quickly you can move without mistakes. It's an interval-based work, so you go up into a point where you start to find some struggle with your ability to sustain good mechanics, recover, slap yourself a few times, try it again, recover, try it again, recover, and in hopes that as time goes on, as you're producing these intervals, you're finding greater and greater heights of your velocity. You're able to produce greater speeds without mistakes. These two things together represent your skill in the workout. We're tuning the instrument by making sure the timing is correct. Then we're challenging our ability to create some pace. It has nothing to do with heart rate. It's really not a function of what distance you're going to travel. It's when you make your way up to speed and you find that they're kind of at a peak velocity where you can't create good form any longer, you recover and try it again. After that 15 minutes worth of skill work, then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to push the envelope a little bit. We're getting into the lactic acid, we're getting into the anaerobic end of things. What I've not discussed is the size of these icons. When they're smaller, they represent less. When they're bigger, they represent greater. So as you can see, there are basically about 3 different sizes among those icons. And in this case, for the first one, the anaerobic icon is indicating a smaller. So we're going to, if we're referring back to the heart rate numbers we had a moment ago, we're looking at about 160-ish beats per minute at this point. We're going to stay there for about 2 minutes. Not too stressful, but it's just giving you a chance to feel a little bit of work. Then we're going to retire a little bit. We're going to drop the heart rate down for about 5 minutes. And for those 5 minutes, we're going to be aerobic. And the aerobic heart rate is moderate. So let's just, in the case of 150-ish being our aerobic target, let's call it like 150. Let's call it 150. And then after we've been 5 minutes at 150, we're gonna break some eggs. We're gonna go right into some intensity, go to that VO2 max effort, and we're gonna try to hang on to our best effort for about 1 minute. Now, what that heart rate represents is yet to be determined. But I would suggest, as I said earlier, about 90–95% of your maximum heart rate. After that minute, we're going to retire back into that aerobic environment again. And notice now that the icon is smaller. So that's suggesting that the heart rate is going to be less. So I would take you down to probably 135, 140, and really trying to clear out some of that lactate production that you created for yourself, recover from the intensity, and guess what? Right back in it again. Now this time, the icon, the VO2 max icon, is not quite as large. So let's say we're punching it up to like 180 beats per minute, hanging on to that for about a minute. Then we're going to float back down and recover at that aerobic icon again. And then we're going to go a little bit harder into the anaerobic metabolism again for 2 minutes. Now this time, we're going to go up, say, like 170 beats per minute. So we were at 160-ish the last time we tried this. This time we're going to go to about 170. And what's interesting about this, you're going to find that second attempt is going to seem easier. You're probably going to want to go for a little bit longer at that heart rate because you can. And it's an adaptation. You've developed an adaptation from the influences that you created earlier in the work. And then after you've done that, we're going to drop back down, get a gulp of air again, going into that aerobic metabolism again, this time probably around 140 beats per minute. And then, boom, we're going to go right back into some anaerobic metabolism again for about 4 minutes. Now, this icon's a little smaller than the other one, which indicates it's less heart rate. So I would say probably about 160 beats per minute. And we're going to hold on to that for about 4 minutes. And then after that, we're going to get a nice, clean aerobic treatment for about 6 minutes at a relatively low intensity. We're talking about 145 beats per minute. Boom, right back into some anaerobic metabolism again. We're going to punch it up to, say, let's call it 160, and then straight into some intensity again, from anaerobic to this VO2 max effort. So in this case, I'm going to say probably, again, going back up to about 170-ish beats per minute, 175. Then once again, dropping back down for 5 minutes aerobic to clear, and then back into the anaerobic effort for a couple minutes, probably what, 165-ish, 170 maybe. Workout's done. You basically went through the entire loop, and it took about 60 minutes to do this workout. So the tail of the tape is after we've completed 60 minutes worth of training, we've touched all the bases. 53% of the work was aerobic, meaning that that's the dominant influence in this training was to be aerobic. But we did not dispatch the need for anaerobic influence. So we got 22% of the work was dedicated to the anaerobic influence, and 25% of it was dedicated to skill. Now, here's the thing. If you were to do this kind of workout, maybe with some variations here and there, over the course of a week, the dominant influence is still aerobic metabolism. The benefit of doing this flow-styled training is that you cover all the bases. You're working in a much more robust energy system, rather than having a day where you're dedicated exclusively to being aerobic and a day where you're going to do like a track workout where the intensity is very high, and mishmash putting these pieces together in hopes that at the end of the week that you got the type of influence you were hoping for. In this case, you're capable of pulling the trigger on what type of speed you need whenever you need it, and it's going to be there for you. That's the way you should be training. I hope this helped you.